to take just a few minutes to talk about the partnership that has brought this workshop to Ohio University a year after we held our first symposium on youth sport in Africa. It's a partnership that found a natural home together. The Department of African Studies, the Institute for the African Child, and the Sports Administration Program. I think we've seen, and we'll see during the next day and a half of the workshop, how sport across disciplines can influence the lives of children and the lives of people, particularly the lives of people in Africa. It is certainly, it's been an important part of our work, and I hope will become a more important part of our work, and of Ohio University's work, to recognize the link that sports holds for so much of society and so much of culture. And I believe the workshops that are in front of you for the next, for this afternoon and for tomorrow will do a great deal to open your eyes and to develop in us the creative process to see how we can have an influence and share in the development of the lives of young people on that continent through sport. I looked at this address, and I cannot tell you how amazed I am not only to be in the same room with our featured speaker, but to actually stand in the same place where he's going to stand. And to tell students that you will understand what I say in times to come, how quickly current events become history. I remember the impact that our speaker had on the thought process of young people in this country and around the world 37 years ago, and what's developed during the intervening decades, and how much we've achieved, but also how much we have left to achieve. So Dr. Najee Mohammed will introduce him, but I want to say that I'm extremely honored that Lee Evans is here to speak to us, and I think that you all will understand why after you've heard him talk. So without taking up too much more of your time, again, I want to welcome all of you. I hope you will be active participants in this workshop. There's a great deal to be done, and this is a great forum to start it. Next, I would like to introduce the person who will introduce Lee Evans from our own faculty and Cultural Studies Department of the College of Education, Dr. Najee Mohammed. Dr. Mohammed, thank you.
Well, I've been instructed by my esteemed colleagues, as many people know me, I have a tendency to be rather long-winded, if you believe that, and at least some of my students already know that. So I've been instructed by some of my colleagues that I need to keep my comments short, that is, under 30 minutes. So obviously, I cannot do that. But just let me quickly say, because one of the things when you're dealing with somebody from history, is the best way to know about them is not for you to talk about them, but really for them to talk about their story, their narrative. Let them speak in their voice. And early when I talked to Mr. Evans, I said, well, what is it you want me to say about you, brother? And he said, well, just keep it short. It sort of reminded me of Malcolm X. When Malcolm was introduced, Malcolm used to always say, just make it plain. And so he said, just make it plain, and just mention that, I ran the Olympics in '68, and that I have, set the world record in the 400 meters, which stood for 20 years. What was it, 44.8? 43? I'm sorry. You did run 44 flat in the trials, is that correct? There you go. Okay, so if for those of you who've ever run track, and if you've ever run the 400 meters, the 400 meters is like the basis for half mile, marathon, to run that fast is just absolutely incredible. It's absolutely incredible. This man ran with a strength and a viciousness. He attacked the track. He attacked the 400 meters in a time when he and two other brothers were attacking the system of racism in the United States. The 68 is very powerful. For those of you young students who don't know anything about historical context, you need to understand that you're in the presence of a giant. 68 was powerful. 3 years after Malcolm. King in April of '68. Robert Kennedy in June of '68. '68 was a time of numb. It was a time of poverty. It was a time of apathy, death, and disease. And these brothers, in particular this man here, decided to attack the system to stand up against a racist Olympic system that tried their best to suppress them. 2 of his colleagues were thrown out, banned from the Olympics for life. He runs the next day, stands up on the podium with 2 other brothers. They wear black berets, thinking, scared half to death because he'd gotten death threats, and they told him they'd shoot him and what time they would. You know? So you need to listen to what it is he has to say, and if we want to have him back here. That's number 1. We need to invite him back here to have him tell another part of the story. And with that said, without me going on any further, I want to welcome, and extremely an honor, you don't know historically, because I come out of that period, that revolutionary period. It is my esteemed honor to welcome to you and present to you Mr. Lee Evans. Mr. Evans speaks on behalf of the African Sports Across Disciplines Workshop. We want to present him with a token of our appreciation for coming to Ohio University and sharing with us his revolutionary and educational experience, and just so when he leaves here, he has something to remember us by. Mr. Evans, there you go. Thank you very much.
Thank Najee for that great introduction. And I'd like to thank Gerard Ackendis and Nana for their persistence in getting me here. I had many other invitations around this same time, but I decided to come here, and I told Ackendis that I opened your email only because I recognized the tribe that I thought he might have come from in Africa, because you delete most of your emails, because I think it's spam or virus. But I did not delete his email to me, inviting me here because I recognized the name as being West African. I'm going to tell you about a little bit about myself and bring you up through my African experience and what I went through as a young student in America back in the 60s. My father was born in Monroe, Louisiana. My mother was born in Shreveport, Louisiana. They were sharecroppers. Sharecroppers came after slavery, you know, where the slave owner give you a plot of land and you work your little plot, but you also had to work his land. The payment that you received for working his land was a plot of land he gave you for yourself. So that's what my parents did in Louisiana. In 1946, my mother said she was pregnant with me when she boarded a train and left Louisiana to California. So I was born in California in 1947. And people said, where did you get that accent from? But I lived overseas for over 20 years, so I kind of lost my California accent. But growing up in rural California, again, my father was a farmer. We did farm labor, and as a child I did farm labor work. I picked cotton, I picked grapes. Anything that was available to be harvested, that's what I participated in that. And along with my other siblings, there were 7 of us. My father, he did work with cement, so my mother would bring us to the cotton fields or to the grape fields or to the peach orchard or to whatever to be harvested over the summer. And on Saturdays, Sunday we went to church. But I grew up working hard, and my mother taught me what you receive dividends from hard work, and that carried me throughout my whole life and up to this day. And I try to teach that to my kids, and I teach that to my students, that you got to work hard if you want to benefit. But I was a middle child. I had 2 older brothers and an older sister. I had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. So when I started school, I didn't talk very much at home. There was no space for me to talk. I had the older brothers, sisters, younger brothers, sisters, and my mother was the oldest of 11 sisters. So you African Americans, we had cousins living with us. I we always had 3 or 4 cousins living with us, so, you know, I didn't have to talk. And so, by me not having to talk, I used to daydream a lot. And I don't know how I started to receive these dreams of myself being a great runner. And I used to meditate on these things all the time. And I remember we'd be driving along a rural country road to go pick cotton somewhere, and I could see myself running, jumping over the tumbleweeds, running very fast, keeping up with the car. They were just dreams that I had. You know, I never knew they would manifest themselves. But I had an older brother who was a great athlete. His name was Douglas Evans. He was 6'2", strong guy. He was best football player in the state of California in 1960. For those of you who know track and field, in 1960 he ran 400 meters in 48.5, 800 meters in 155. Was the best defensive end and offensive end in the state of California. The first time a white person ever came to our house, when coaches were coming to our house to recruit my brother, you know. So it was, and I really admired him. And he should have been a professional football player. He had the size and the strength, and as Archie Moore taught me, I learned from Archie Moore, the famous heavyweight champion fighter. He said my brother had heavy hands. Some people would just have heavy hands. I mean, my brother or Archie Moore would pat me in the back and like that. And their hands were just like they had bricks thrown into their hands. Some people have heavy hands. My brother had heavy hands. I mean, if he hit you, something was going to break. And my mother took me to watch him to run a race once in Fresno, California, and it was a 4x400 meter relay. My brother received the baton about 60 meters behind the boys who were in front. My brother caught this guy from 60 meters back. To me, that was the most glorious thing that I've ever seen in my life. And it inspired me to, well, I want to be like Douglas. He's my older brother. So that was my dream, to be like him. But my brother, he graduated from high school. He went to college, dropped out in 2 months. My mother cried, you know. And I said, whoa, you know, and he's 5 years older than me. So I said, I'm not going to make Mom cry the way Douglas did. So I was telling my older brother that I never would have made it without his mistakes. You know, his girlfriend got pregnant, he dropped out of university, my mother cried every time, you know. And I didn't like to see my mother cry. So, but Douglas is making all my mother cry all this time. It taught me what not to do. You know, and I always tell him, I said, and he was my first coach as well. I always tell Douglas is not for you, I never would have done it. Because you made so many mistakes for me not to make. But I'm going to tell you about my education. I think it was about the 6th grade when I learned about who I was and where I came from. Being in rural Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, near Madera, Fresno, California, there was only one other black student in the classroom with me, and maybe 2 or 3 other Mexican Americans who did farm labor work as well. And everyone else were Caucasian, and we always sit in the back. I did not feel like a part of the situation. This is like in the 50s, okay? I felt alienated. And black parents in those days, they did not explain to the child, hey, you know, your ancestors are from Africa and we were ex-slaves and la la la. They didn't tell us anything. So I'm trying to figure out, well, why am I here? I look different from everybody. I was confused. I did not know. My parents did not tell me. But in the 6th grade, we were reading in the book one day, slaves from West Africa, they were black. It was like a light came on my brain. That's me. That's who I am. I'm from Africa. And the next second, I said, I'm going back. And it took me 1 second to realize that where my ancestors came from, and the next second, I said, I've got to go back there. And over the years, I felt that the spirit of my ancestor was pulling me back and calling me back. I'm a bit spiritual in that sense, and I believe that to this day. And I always tell people, I'm going to go back to Africa for the African who was taken away over 200 years ago, so his spirit can rest in peace. I felt that deep inside me. That was something that was planted. I don't know. I think that guy followed me around and was kicking me. You got to go back to Africa. And you African Americans, you know, we are. Most of us are from West Africa. So when I went to the Olympic Games in 1968, which was a long, hard road for me. You know, I as a freshman in university, and I hadn't planned on going to university. I thought I was going in the Army because the counselors did not try to show me the way to university. They would show me how to join the Army when I got out of high school. But my junior year in high school, I went to the California State meet, and I took third in the 400 meters. I tied for third in the 400 meters. And I started getting letters from universities offering me scholarships. And this one I became interested in going to university. I started to study harder to be able to get into university. I attended San Jose State University. And my freshman year, I was 19 years old. I was undefeated. I was #1 in the world. And I traveled to Europe for the first time. I got on the airplane for the first time. And all these things happened when I was 18 years old. I'm 19 years old. And I'll tell you some of this stuff is funny, so don't laugh too hard. But the Nationals that year was held in Randall's Island, New York. It was in California. I had never been on the airplane before. I said, Coach, how long this? Can we drive to New York? He said, no, it's too far. So we boarded the plane, and the school, and I was favored to win because I had one of the fastest time in the nation as a freshman. And my coach, you know, I'm looking up above the bench. I'm looking for something. And the coach said, why don't you come sit down? I said, Coach, I'm looking for the parachute, you know. And they got to be parachutes on the plane. He said, there's no parachute, sit down. I said, what are we going to do with the airplane tonight? He said, we just have to just sit here. You know, that was hard for me to take, you know. Watching television all my life, there was parachutes on the plane, right? So that wasn't even fun getting on that plane. Well, we made it to New York, and I won the national championships, and I was the national champion. And after the race was over, they had a table like this with men sitting there, and they said, come over here, Mr. Evans, Lady Evans, you just won the national championships, and what are you going to do this summer? I said, well, I'm going to go back to San Jose. They said, no, you're the national champion. This year we have trips to Belgium, France, Switzerland, Austria, and England. I signed up for every country. I said, really? So here I am, I'm sitting on the plane next to Ralph Boston, a guy that I just admire tremendously, flying to Europe, you know, and I went undefeated. You know, I wasn't famous, but I was a well-known 400-meter runner by this time. Going to San Jose State was good for me because I got a chance to meet people like Professor Harry Edwards. And he's the one who founded the Olympic Project for Human Rights. And this was the name of our organization that threatened a boycott of the 1960 Olympic Games for many different reasons. You know, disenfranchised, of course, but there was no black Olympic coaches on the staff. And we made demands that if these things were not offered to us, we didn't have a black coach on staff, that we were not going to go to the games. And it was a threat, of course, and you know, with a threat you get some results sometimes. But we had decided that the athletes would vote at the Olympic trials in Los Angeles in 1968, if whether to go or not. But by the fact that we threatened to boycott these games, oh man, the editors of every magazine and newspaper were attacking us, called us all kind of names. We got threats in our life from the Ku Klux Klan, the White Angels, the John Birch Society, the American Rifle Association. I got some of those too. Yeah, I'm gonna kill you niggas, go back to Africa, that type of thing. They sent us mock tickets back to, I got tickets back to Africa, you know, mock, there'll be chicken coops on board. all the stereotypes. There'll be watermelon patches on board for you niggas to steal watermelon. There'll be chicken coops for you to steal chickens. You know, all these stereotypes that you heard about black people, that was on the ticket. And it wasn't fun. The tickets were funny, but it wasn't funny to when someone threatened your life just for speaking your mind in a so-called free country. So arriving, you know, first I want to say that Professor Edwards, I took his sociology class. He was a sociology professor. And one of the required readings was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that book changed my life. Because many things in his book, I felt that it was me. I felt the pain he felt. I experienced the same things he felt. All through my childhood days when I was the only black guy in his class in rural Fresno, California, it explained to me in his book. And I felt the same way he felt in many ways. So I got to Mexico City. By now I'm a black nationalist. You know, I'm really proud of my people, and we're going to go to Olympic Games. We're going to win a lot of medals for America. But most of all, I was looking forward to meeting African athletes. I had met Kipchoge Keynote when he had come to San Francisco to run an indoor mile. And I was surprised that a black person was running a mile, because when I went to high school, and I told the coach, I thought I was slow, so I told the coach I wanted to run the mile. He said, oh, colored boys can't run the mile. You guys don't have the wind to run the mile. It's like they told us we couldn't swim also, because our bones were too heavy. Seriously, and back in the 50s, that's what they told us. You blacks, you said, well, why do you blacks only run the sprints? But it's through tradition and what you've been taught. They told us that we could not run over 800 meters back in the 50s, and we believed them. These are your teachers, your professors. Then all of a sudden, Kipchoge Keynote from Kenya is whooping everybody in the mouth. You know? Even Jim Ryan, who was the world record holder, you know. So I said, well, I think they must have been lying to us about this stuff, you know? But, you know, you guys just don't know what you go through when being born back in those days, okay? But I got to Mexico City, and I was really discouraged by the fact that the West African nations like the Ghanaians, the Nigerians, the Cameroonians, and the Togolese, and the Senegalese, they were all being eliminated in the first round. I said, wait a minute, I said, my ancestor came from over here somewhere in West Africa. If we can run fast, how come they're not running fast? Then I watched them closely. They had bad technique, and I can tell they hadn't really prepared themselves correctly to be in the Olympic Games at this time. So then I went to my coach. I said, Coach, you know, these West Africans, they're not, you know, and because at the same time, the East Africans were winning everything. The long distance, middle and long distance races. The Kenyans and the Ethiopians won all the middle and long distance races in Mexico City. The West Africans did not win anything. And I felt, you know, we African Americans represented West Africa at the time. But the West African nationals themselves were not winning anything, and I felt compelled to go back there and teach them. So I told my coach, I said, Coach, I finally know what I'm going to do in my life now. I'm going to go to West Africa and become a coach. And I asked him, Coach, how would I go about doing this? My coach was an Irishman, Bud Winters. And he does some work for the State Department, so he knew of a man by the name of Mel Whitfield. Mel Whitfield won a gold medal in the 800 meters in 1952 Olympic Games and 56. And he was the chief of the African desk in Africa for Sports America. There's a group called Sports America, and they organized sports programs for all of Africa out of his office in Nairobi, Kenya. He gave me Mel Whitfield's address. I wrote to Mel Whitfield. I said, Mel, when I was a junior, I was 21 years old and a junior in university when I won my 2 gold medals in the 1960 Olympic Games. I said, when I graduate from university, I want to come work in Africa, and so I can teach West Africans how to sprint and jump well to win medals in the Olympic Games. He wrote me back and said, when you finish university and get experience, contact me again. All of this is going on during the Olympic Games, but I wrote him during the game. After I won my gold medal in Mexico City, in the press conference, I said, I won this gold medal for all my brothers and sisters in Africa and in the U.S. and my family and friends in San Jose, California. That statement changed my whole life because the very next day, there was a telegram in my box from Mr. Isaac Akioye, Director of Sports for the Institute of Physical Education at the University of Ile-Ife in Ile-Ife, Nigeria. In that telegram, he said, "You are welcome to come coach and teach at the University of Ife anytime." So, of course, I started corresponding with him over the years. This is in '68. I arrived at the University of Ife in 1976. It took me 8 years to get there. But it was my statement about who I won these medals for, and him sending me a telegram. I ended up at the University of Ile-Ife in Nigeria, which is now a Warlow University in Ile-Ife. Nigeria, coach's paradise. Coach's paradise. I love working there. Very exciting place. I was in Lagos for about 8 months before I made it to Ile-Ife. But there, I was able to, they made me the national track and field coach. Then I was called the principal coach because there was a Nigerian, George Gideon was the chief coach, but he was studying, getting his master's degree at the University of, at Arizona State in Phoenix, Arizona. So their main objective, my main task was to train some athletes in Nigeria to win medals in the 1976 Olympic Games. And there was a selection process, of course. They had, in Nigeria at the time, they had this called the Schoolboys Championships. The girls competed as well, but it was a high school national championship. And Nigeria has a wealth of athletes. As you know, it is the most populous country in Africa. And it was like a 3-day competition, and I was able to select some athletes. Plus, they had an idea of who was the best athletes in the country at the time, and we brought them all to the University of Ile-Ife. They housed them there, and they fed them there, and I trained them. I taught classes in the Institute of Physical Education, as well as trained the university team. Mr. Isaac Akioye, the one who sent me the original telegram, had become the national sports director of the National Sports Commission, they call it. So he was the top sports official in the country. So this made it easier for me to have this training center at the University of Ile-Ife in southwestern Nigeria at the time. And I had great support. You know, Nigeria, this was during the time of the oil boom, as they call it in Nigeria. You know, Nigeria has sweet oil, and the sweet oil means it's easy, oil is easy to refine. And the U.S. government still, we export a lot of oil from Nigeria. So there was money, I would say money was flying through the air in Nigeria. They had money to spend. And so we had a very exciting training camp. We had athletes who were running times fast enough to win medals in the Olympic Games. I had one girl by the name of Gloria Anyalaja. I thought we could have won a medal in the 400 meters. Then I had 2 young men in the 400 meters. Some of them were students here in the U.S. at the time. You talk about what sports can do. In Nigeria at the time, the objective for students who came to the national stadium was to run fast enough to get an athletic scholarship to come to America to study. And to this day, they still are trying to do that. But unfortunately, as a coach at a Division I school, it's very difficult to have an athlete from Nigeria to come to my school to run for my team. This is because the State Department, since 9/11, the State Department has really cut back on issuing visas, student visas for student athletes. I don't know why they think the student athletes have anything to do with terrorism, but they found themselves a very good excuse not to give visas to a lot of students. But getting back to 1976, the 1976 Olympic Games was to be held in Montreal, Canada. Montreal, Canada. And that was our objective, was to go to Montreal, Canada, go there and win some medals. But you know, politics is always generating some excitement. South Africa, you know, the apartheid regime was trying to find themselves back into the Olympic arena, but they were banned because if South Africa was to show up at any Olympic Games, the black African countries would definitely pull out. So they could not invite South Africa to be there. But also, the Supreme Council of Sport for Africa had decided that if any nation who comes to the Games, if they have any sporting contacts with South Africa, that the black African countries will not participate in the Games along with them. And the South Africa had a rugby team, was traveling around the world trying to find competitions, and New Zealand accepted for the South African rugby team to come to, I guess, New Zealand for a rugby match. And that spoiled everything for the 1976 Olympic Games. Because we arrived in Montreal in 1976, I got this team that I think is going to win 4 medals in the Olympic Games with the Nigerian team. And I come into my apartment one day. I was in an apartment adjacent to Mr. Isaac Akiole, who was the chief mission for the Nigerian team. He said, "Lee, pack your bags, we're going home." I said, "Whoa, what you talking about?" He said, "Yes," he said, Murtala Muhammad was the president of Nigeria. He said, "We decided that Africa was going to boycott the Olympic Games." I was just shocked. I said, "Whoa." I said, you know, because New Zealand was there. New Zealand had played a rugby match with South Africa, which meant that Africans are not going to run against in the Olympic Games. And in 1976, all of Africa pulled out of the Olympic Games, you know, because of New Zealand's sporting contacts with South Africa. Now that was, for me personally, that was really hard to take because here I had worked really hard for 2 years to train this team that I thought would win medals. But things happen. I learned things happen in life that you cannot control. But I think it was for the better because, so as you know, the apartheid regime finally fell. But sports played a part in that, you know. And I learned that through my experience, of our experience in Mexico City, where we had to stand up for, I felt that we stand up for every black man and black woman in America by our protests that we had in Mexico City. And as Najee mentioned, these protests were made under duress. I mean, people were threatening our lives daily. And it wasn't fun to be up on that victory stand. We decided we would smile a lot, thinking that it would be hard to shoot someone who's smiling while we were on the victory stand. So it wasn't any fun at all. But in the 1970s, coaching and working in Nigeria, I felt like I was a training center for the American universities. Texas Southern University in Texas is a traditional black university. Won the NCAA championships with, they had 10 Nigerian girls on their track and field team, and they won the NCAA championships. Just mainly with Nigerian girls on their team. And other universities, like even universities in Mississippi were recruiting athletes from Nigeria. So I was training athletes in Nigeria to come to America to get their education. And they were excellent students. And those of you who are professors, you find that these African students are very bright. They do very well. And right now, I think when I was in Nigeria, I counted 60 athletes who I helped to come to America to get their education. Some of them have come back and become professors and leaders in their countries, especially in generals as well. And I'm very proud of that fact that I played a part in helping them get their education through sports again. So when he say across disciplines, sports can do a lot. I was after 1978 All-Africa Championships in Algeria, Mel Whitfield, you know, the sports officer that I told you about, who said I should contact him to come to Africa. He was at the All Africa Games that was in Algeria in 1978. He said, Lee, I see you've done a great job with the Nigerian team. He says, when are your contract up with Nigeria? I said, well, it's going to be finished next year. He said, contact me. He said, I want to hire you to work with me. So when my contract finished in Nigeria, I contacted Mel Whitfield, and I started work for the State Department. Because at this time, I only lived and worked in Nigeria for 6 years. I was there in Nigeria. So I got a job working with the State Department. Here is, the American government, who was very angry with me, at one time was now hiring me to work for them in Africa. I said, well, this is a big surprise. So, it was a good one, and I enjoyed my work there because they sent me to 21 different countries in Africa where I got a chance to work with sports administrators, coaches, and young athletes. And Mel Whitfield was a great guy to work with because he had been over there. He had worked in Africa for 30 years by this time. And so this is how I was able to meet my wife. They sent me to Madagascar in 1984. Madagascar, that's that big island on the other side of Africa, isn't it? He said, yeah. So I went, but it's considered Africa. I went there in 1984, and I was giving a speech in a room very similar to this. And I saw a woman, a young lady in the back, looked just like my mother. I thought, that's my first reaction. But anyway, I had a translator then. I didn't speak French, and I told my agent, who is that? He told me, well, it's one of my best athletes. She's working on her master's. And I said, make sure she's in this program that we're running over at the stadium. So to make a long story short, we married. We got 4 children, and and we lived in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, and Madagascar. So all my children speak 3 or 4 different languages. Well, my oldest daughter speaks 4, and my children speak 3. So it's been being able to travel and to live in different countries has been great for me. But let me tell you about working for the State Department. Meant that I was able to go to countries like Malawi, Botswana, Swaziland, countries, small countries that had like maybe 1 or 2 major cities. And I met young African athletes who were just hungry to be trained, who wanted to be a part, who wanted the Olympic experience. And so I couldn't, I spent about 1 month in these countries, so I couldn't be their coach to bring them to the level. So what I had to do, I had 1 month to train that coach. And what I found that African coaches and administrators, they learn very quickly, but to get them to be there every day, to do the work. And I found this is what I had to do. I said, you got to show up every day. I said, if you don't come, the athlete's not going to come. And this is one of the problems that I saw that needed to be attended to was them being disciplined enough to be there every day. I don't care if it rained or whatever. You have to be there. If you're there, the athlete's going to be there. And I was able to get over to some coaches and who are now developing Olympic class athletes in these different countries. And I'm happy to say that I played a big part in that. Wilt Chamberlain, before he died, would call me on the phone, and he would always introduce me as, this is Lee Evans, the guy who put Nigeria on the map and to help him to win the Olympic medals. And Wilt Chamberlain loved track and field. He went to the University of Kansas, and he was a track and field athlete as well as a basketball player. And he really recognized what I had done in Nigeria. I didn't know he followed sports that closely. And if he hadn't passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago, he had plans to do some big projects in West Africa. Now, I want to open this up to see any questions, because I'm sure I haven't touched on something that you might want to hear about, because I've tried to give you a little bit of each part of my life, how it developed for me in the U.S., in university, and in Africa.
I just want to say you're the rich man.
Yeah.
You are.
Thank you very much.
You are.
love this coach. No, it's like it's real. I have not only have I had the opportunity to introduce him, but I also have the opportunity to give him a few gifts. Coming from African Studies, Center for International Studies, and the Sports Administration program, we want to continue to welcome you to Ohio University as an African from the continent and the United States. We want to welcome you here. We want you back here. I look forward to coming back to that.
I want to thank all of you very much. I've enjoyed being here, and I've enjoyed talking to you. I've enjoyed answering your questions. I look forward to coming back again.